I'm live. I'm reading out of Lord of the Horizon. We're in the second part of this book. It is chapter 11, Spawn of Set. This is one of Joan Marshall Grant's far memory books, where she recounts a previous life. This life is as Ra-Ab, who we already know from Eyes of Horus, who defeated Set. Anyhow, we're here in the second part. Ra-Ab is grown up, has children, and chapter 11, Spawn of Set. Senusert was usually present when I received petitioners in audience, and at the end of the day I used to discuss each judgment with him, explaining the threads I had followed to reach a decision. Before you give judgment, Senusert, always try to think as the petitioner thinks, for only then can you understand the seed from which his action sprang. Knowledge of events in themselves is not enough. You must know the motive for them and the cause of the motive. It is the cause which is the most important of all, for unless this is removed, the motive remains, and similar actions will almost inevitably follow. It is not enough to punish the action. You must try to cure the unbalance which made that action possible. Today we heard evidence of the actions of a thief. Now we must decide how he may be best cured. We know he has recently come to our exiles' village, that though he has been supplied with everything he needs, he steals whenever he has opportunity. Yet in hearing what he steals, we find that there are things which seem to have no value except to their original owners. He took from a neighbor's house a bunch of dried flowers, kept because they had been a love gift from the storeroom of the village overseer, 2 empty wine jars, each of which bore an inscription saying that they were a gift from my father in token of honorable service. Then he stole corn from the granary, measure by measure, and buried it under the floor of his house. It was already spoiled when it was found, for that portion of it had not grown mouldy, had been eaten by rats. Then he took a polished bone on which a linen weaver's baby cut its teeth. Curious things for a man to steal, Senusert, but sufficient to give an indication as to why he became a thief. But what did they tell you? A bunch of dried flowers, wine jars, which were the gift of my father, grain stored by me against famine, a baby's plaything. What have they all in common? The flowers are dead, the wine jars empty, the grain spoiled, the bone, I suppose the bone was also dead. Did he then so despise himself that even though he couldn't help being a thief, he took things which were useless except to one so insignificant as he thinks himself to be? That is sound reasoning, but in this case incorrect. Then did he steal things which people would most mind losing, because he wanted to prove that they were hurt by a trivial loss and therefore weaker than himself? That again is sound reasoning, but not a true interpretation of the facts. You have forgotten what else you have heard about him, that he came from the sycamore, that he came alone, that his parents died when he was a child, or so he says, that he has no brothers and sisters, nor has he a wife. He has been here for nearly half a year, yet he has made no friend. Now, can you guess why he steals such curious things? I think I'm beginning to see. He is lonely. He is frightened by loneliness. He longs for friendship, even though he may not realize it, yet he has made no attempt to find a friend. Why? Perhaps because he has a secret which he feels a close friend would discover, a secret which he is desperately anxious to hide. Good, Senusert, very good, go on. Although he won't admit it even to himself, he wants a friend so desperately that he is driven, perhaps almost against his will, to steal what he thinks will never be given to him. He takes the dead flowers because he knows or guesses that they are cherished as a love token. Perhaps he thinks they may be a talisman which will bring love to him. Then he steals the wine jars because they were a token of honorable friendship. Yet he steals them when they are empty, for he wants a friend who will love him in spite of his secret, not because his suspicions are lulled by wine. You may be right there, though I think it more probable that he took empty jars because wine should be drunk in company, and to possess wine is bitter when you have no one with whom to share it. Go on now, Senusert. He took the bone from the baby because it represented the baby, the security of family life. He had left out the grain hidden under the floor. Oh yes, that was the third thing. Isn't that another symbol of security, protection against future famine? Famine not only of food, but of friendship. The four things together make up the pattern of the life of a contented man. Flowers, the love between man and women. Wine jars, the gift to a respected member of the community. Grain, which is in the gift of the keeper of the granaries, the man who can give food to the hungry. The protector instead of the friendless outcast. A bone which represents a child, the next generation to which he can hand on the security, the honor, the love which he has now acquired. You have read the signs as I have read them. Now see whether your judgment of what should be done to cure him is also the same as mine. Senusert paused before answering and then said with conviction, He longs for friendship yet dare not seek it. Why? Because he has a secret which makes him go in fear. He will never lose that fear until he has found a friend to whom he can tell his secret. Only then will he be free. Again, I agree with you, and I think that you may prove to be the friend he needs. He is in one of the rooms of the House of Petitioners. Go to him tonight, wearing clothes which will lead him to think you come from the same caste as his own. Say that you are to share his room while you are waiting for me to receive you in audience. I leave it to you to discover a way by which to gain his confidence. You may find it necessary to pretend that you are also a thief or a fellow exile. Use any means you can think of, and remember that your mission is as urgent as though you were a healer priest, and he is suffering from a pestilence which is in your power to cure. Senusert came to me early the following morning. His voice was husky and his eyes looked as though he had not slept. Come and have a swim before you tell me what happened, I said. You look as though you need it, and it's going to be a very hot day again today. He grinned ruefully. You'd better dive first, for my head feels so hot that the pool might start to boil when I get into it. I found our patient was so morose that I told him I had succeeded in bribing one of the soldiers to bring us a jar of beer. He brought mead instead. I think it must have come from your storeroom. It was so strong. At first, my companion refused to share it, and when he did, he insisted on my cup being filled as often as his own. Unless his head is made of granite, I'm sorry for him this morning, nearly as sorry as I was for myself until a few moments ago. The cool water revived him considerably, and as it was very pleasant in the garden, I sent for fruit juice and a bowl of curds, so that we could have the first meal before going back to the house. Only when he had finished eating did he continue his story. I suppose we must have drunk more than half the jar of mead before he began to talk. His speech was thick, but after a while it grew exceedingly fluent, and words poured out of him like water through a sluice. His father was a priest of one of the Set temples, somewhere in the north, and his mother was the daughter of a temple guard. She was afraid that if it were discovered that she was going to have a child, either she or the baby or both would be killed. So she fled from her nome and went to the sycamore to seek refuge with a distant kinsman of her father's. But Though the family to whom she went gave her shelter, they did so very grudgingly, and when she died, soon after the baby was born, I think they were sorry it didn't die too. They gave him just enough food to keep him alive, and because they thought the son of a priest of Set was accursed, they would not let him speak to their own children or play with the children of the village. They even made him sleep in a storeroom some distance from the main dwelling. He must have been terribly lonely, for even the work he had to do did not bring him into contact with people. When he was only a young boy, he had to work from dawn to sunset, deepening irrigation ditches and breaking new fields, and at the end of the day he had to groom 2 pairs of oxen before he was allowed to rest. He was often beaten. His back is still marked with old scars. The only person who ever spoke to him was a girl who lived with her widowed mother on the other side of the village. She became the sole object of his affection, and he was convinced that she returned his love. When he was 16, he gave her a bunch of moon daisies on the festival of Min to show that he wished to ask for her in marriage. She threw down the flowers, stamped on them, and then ran away laughing. It was on the Min festival of the following year that someone took compassion on him and asked him to join in the village feast. They gave him beer, which he had never tasted before, and he must have drunk a lot of it, for when he began to feel dizzy, he thought they had tried to poison him. He attacked his companions with a knife and wounded one of them in the shoulder. He was disarmed, and the headsman ordered his kinsman to give 2 goats as compensation to the wounded man. His kinsman shut him up in the storeroom for 20 days with only water and raw grain to eat. He was very ill after that, he said, with an affliction of the bowels. Anyway, he wasn't strong enough to do as much work as they expected of him, and whenever he disobeyed, they starved him again until he was so weak that he was forced into obedience. Soon afterwards, the daughter of his kinsman married and had a baby. One day, when it was about 3 years old, it was playing in the field where he was working, and it fell and bruised its leg. He carried it back to the house. The mother screamed when she saw him holding the child and said that by touching it, he had brought it under the influence of Set. When he tried to explain that he had only brought it back to her because it was hurt, she spat in his face and cursed him, saying, "You, who were born the child of Set, defile everything you touch. The house which you enter is unclean, and he who calls you friend proves himself to belong to the caverns." That's why he came to the Oryx. He had heard that we accepted outcasts, and believing himself to be evil, he was bitterly disappointed to find that our people belonged to Ra, for he had thought that among the children of Set, to whom he had imagined all outcasts belonged, he would at last find a friend. Senusert broke off and laughed. I hope that he is still feeling as friendly towards me as he did last night, when he was sure that I was not going to cringe away from him. He was not certain whether I was as evil as he was, or whether he had deceived himself about his own character. He kept on saying, "I don't mind who you are or where you come from. Spawn of Set you may be, and your house may stink of crocodiles, but you're my friend. Anyone who denies it has got to fight me. My arms are so strong as an ape's, even though I am not so tall as some people. I'll be a good friend to you, and I'll never be particular as to what you do. If you want a man killed, well, I'll help. If you want to poison one of your relatives, well, I'll help. A friend, that's what I am, a friend." Then he went to sleep with his head on my shoulder and snorted so loudly I was nearly deafened. "You have done excellently, Senusert. It is interesting to see that we were right. Each theft did point to the motive, and the motive led you to what has caused it. The flowers cherished, not thrown down, as it were, as his were. The empty wine jars instead of the one filled with beer that led to conflict. The grain hidden under the floor so that he would never starve if he were shut in there as a prisoner. The plaything of a child which he can touch as though it were the child itself, and yet do it no harm. What shall we do with your new friend? He was right when he said he had strong arms. I should know that well enough, for he hugged me when he said I was his brother and nearly staved in my ribs. I think he should make a good oarsman, and it is a companionable life. I told him that your chief steersman was a friend of mine, and would have him trained to take a place in one of your barges. I even told him that one day he might row in Pharaoh's barge. He stood up and stretched his arms above his head and laughed again. It is very good to be alive, Ra-Ab. My head has stopped aching, and the sun is warm. This is another day in which to find new friends. So this is the end of chapter, that was chapter what? Was it chapter 11? Yes, chapter 11, and the next chapter 12 is domestic scene. Wishing all a happy Saturday, April the 6th.